Good morning. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to the New York State Archives webinar, Managing Court Records. Today's presenter is Geof Huth. Geof is the Chief Records Officer for the Office of the New York State Unified Court System. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. We ask that you type any questions you have in the chat box, and we will take them at the end of the presentation. And at this time, I will turn it over to Geof.
I am now the presenter. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to what in Manhattan is a chilly, hazy day. This is going to be a simple presentation, a little talk to help you answer some questions about the management of court records, and also to tell you how we do things differently in the court system, in the judicial branch, than the State Archives does. And I can tell you, I know this well. I worked at the State Archives in most of my career, literally most of my life. So I know quite a bit about it. But there are differences between the way that we at the court system manage retention schedules and manage retention and the way the New York State Archives does. So it will be important for you to understand those. Also, I'm going to assume that some of you are town clerks, some of you are court clerks, and that so you're coming from almost the same place but from slightly different points of view, and we'll talk about that as we go along as well. Ooh, look at this. Here's the first screen, but I already did the screen. So here's the roadmap for today. Very, very simple. First, we're going to tell you something about the Office of Records Management, which was the office that I run. I actually run two offices. I also run essentially the library side. And then we're going to talk about getting records under control, and a lot of that's going to focus on retention and disposition. And we'll end up with as many questions as you have, but just as a surprise, let me tell you that we've already assumed some questions you have, and so we will answer them before we actually open up for questions. So get ready for all of this. So what does the Office of Records Management do? Well, we do what you might expect that we do. And so we do it, but we also do some things that you might not expect. You have to keep this in mind. The court system in New York is the largest and most complex court system in the world. We are very, very complicated. We have 17 different types of courts. In the rest of the United States, nobody has more than 4. That will give you a sense of the complication that we have to deal with. We have a situation where town and village courts are housed in town and villages and supported by those town and villages, but they're sort of part of us as well, and all of their records come under our control. So we have strange different things that we have to do. And so we do anything dealing with taking care of records. For instance, here are the 4 basic things that we do. We develop retention schedules. What does a retention schedule do? It tells you how long you have to keep a record, not how long you're required to keep, not when you should throw away the record, but how long you have to keep it. And so that's a little distinction that we'll get into a little bit later. Here's something that's very different from the New York State Archives. With the New York State Archives, if you're using the LGS-1 schedule, which I hope you are, because it's going to help you out, it's a huge improvement. All you have to do is look at the retention schedule, identify the records that you can throw away based on the retention, and then throw them away. That's what you have to do. In the court system, it is totally different. All records of the courts are records of the court system, any court. And all the records of the court system as a whole are, because there are non-court entities. I come from the administrative branch of the court system, which is non-court. all of these have to be signed off by us. And why is that? It's because in the court system, we're one entity. We're one entity. I'm essentially the records management officer for the court system. And so our office has authority over all records, and we have to be the final determiners of whether or not you can throw away a set of records. This is actually good news to you because we end up taking all the responsibility. You do not have any responsibility because we are supposed to catch your errors. So this is a great thing. Those of you who send in records disposition requests, you probably know Jane Chin, who signs off on almost all of them, and she's what keeps us going. So we do other records management things. We provide guidelines for preservation of records, the storage of records, the use of records, all sorts of details to help you understand rules that you need to follow when you're dealing with court records. Once again, these records will be similar to, these guidelines will be similar to those of the New York State Archives, but also not identical. They will be different in a number of ways. We are governed by different laws, for instance. And of course, in case you couldn't tell it now, we also provide training on records issues. Those of you upstate may have seen some of our presentations, which we now have been doing online, but which we did in person. A lot of those are presented by our staff person, Chloe Edwards-Stowe, who's based just outside of Albany. But we do all sorts of things. We help you to manage your court records in any way you need help. Mostly we give advice. We are a very, very tiny staff. And if you have disasters, we help people with disasters. And luckily, we haven't had any disasters in a short time, which my saying might actually cause them to occur right now. So be on the lookout. And we provide advice with records management in cases where we don't have specific guidance or where you need some ideas on how to solve a records management program. When you get to the end of the show, you'll see that we have a whole list of how to contact us. I'll tell you that Rich Sloma made sure that everything is set up so that you can, so that in your little handout, everything is a live link and you can go to those live links to get to anything that you need to get to. So let's talk about controlling your records. In case you don't think of it this way, the basic goal of records management is control. You're trying to make sure you know where your records are, you know when your records get destroyed, you know how you're supposed to maintain the records, who can see the records, who cannot receive the records. All these things are about control, keeping things in order, making sure things are done correctly. That is a basic goal of records management. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to control the records that you have under your auspices, in your custody. So here's the interesting thing. We start with find your storage areas. This may seem like a funny first line, because theoretically you know where your storage areas are. But I'll tell you a story, just a short one. Jane Chin and I, along with other folks, have been inventorying a huge quantity of records in Manhattan, huge quantity of records. And what we have discovered during this, and these are very old records, they go back to the 1670s. And so what we discovered was people thought they knew where they stored records, but they didn't know where they stored records. So we found records on 3 different floors, in nooks and crannies, under shelves, all sorts of things. So finding your storage area really might be something that you need to do. And even if it isn't, you may have other issues in your storage area that you need to address. So when you're trying to control your records, you have to first find out where they are, and then you have to inventory them. And the inventory is just a process of, finding information about them, et cetera. You will then go on and match that inventory to your retention schedule. That means you say, here is this record, where is it in the retention schedule, what is its retention? Once you determine its retention, you can just determine whether or not you can ask for it to be destroyed. And then you do that by completing one of our records disposition request forms, which I'll call RDRs from now on. I know it sounds like laughing. And then you can finally destroy records. Remember two things with destroy. Number one, you cannot destroy any record at all. Any digital record, any paper record, any microfilm record of any kind, unless you get permission from us. If they are duplicate copies, you still need to get permission from us. This is a very, very heavy hand, and the heavy hand is there to protect you from errors that you might make. So that's the most important thing that you have to remember about this. So make sure you have approval first. So let's go into this in a little bit more detail. Ladies and gentlemen, what you see on the screen right here is an actual de facto storage area for court records from 1907. This is the basement of the famed Tweed building, put in place by Boss Tweed, one of the most famous corrupt politicians of all time. And what you see here is disorder and disarray. And so this is actually where the records I talked to you about earlier came from. They came from this basement, a lot of them. And they got stuck in a building across the street. And guess what? They got stored in essentially the same way. So remember, more than just find your records, try to make sure that you maintain your record storage areas in a way that allows you to find them easily when they're on the shelves, and make sure that they're not susceptible to damage as these are. For instance, when you have things lying on the floor, something could happen to them. There's one rule that I told local governments all during my career. Remember this: if you put a box on a floor overnight, you will get a flood in your storage area. Never leave a box on the floor overnight. This literally did happen to accounting once. After I told them, and they said, Jeff, you were right. Thank God, because I just made it up. So we're going to inventory your records. There are lots of ways to inventory records, so I'll tell you a couple of things just to put this in context. One is that if you want to, the New York State Archives has, of course, put together some forms, et cetera, that you could use if you wanted to collect the information on your records and make sure you're collecting enough information. They're certainly good and usable. I helped create that body of information for people. The other thing is you can make the simplest form you want, something that just says here's what the record's called, here are the years that it covers, here is where it's stored, here is how much space it takes up. Those are the basic pieces of information that you need. So, and then what you do is, so you theoretically do the inventory first. And you might not have to do this, so keep in mind, lots of people don't need to do the inventory. But you do the inventory first, and then you've got the list of the records, and then you can go and you can try to identify what record series title covers it. So when I say record series title, I mean the record series title in our retention schedule. Something that I'll repeat again is that you may call something by a name that is not the same as the name the retention schedule calls it. So you need to figure out what is actually the retention that covers your record, and you do that by reading the description, etc. Another thing, if you can't identify the records, take some notes about specific features of the records, kinds of information they include, something that you can use. If you can't figure it out yourself, those notes might help you when you contact us and we try to help you identify what the records are. And so always remember, in the end, you can reach out to our office if you run into any questions about this or need any help. We are still in pandemic mode, and that means that only one of us is in the office at a time because we're a very small staff. And however, we are still reachable, especially via email. So please, reach out and don't hold back. One other thing that I want to tell you right now is during the pandemic, we have seen a huge increase in the number of requests to dispose of records. And we believe this has happened because so many of you have had restricted court schedules, et cetera, and so cleaning things up and getting things destroyed is what you're working on, and it is a great thing to do. It's a good thing to do when you have the time to do that. What this means is that a lot of you won't be doing this inventory because you've probably already gone through it. But it's still good to know about this, because I hate to tell you this, but having worked with lots of people over many decades, I've noted that sometimes we do some backsliding. And so even after we've put everything in proper order, we might have to start all over again. And now, here are the basic things. If you want to put together your own records inventory form, here are the basic pieces of information that you really need to have. The record series title. Now, at the beginning, that'll just be what you call it. And then you'll figure it out later. A content description, that says, tell us something about the record. Give us some idea of what's inside the record. If you know what the record is, by the series title, you don't even need to add that because you'll be able to find it in the retention schedule. But you put this in so that you can try to figure out the record later on, and it will help you if you need to reach out to us. Another thing that you need to keep in mind is that we have a strange issue with date ranges. Date ranges change. So it's not necessarily year, and you need to know exactly how things are governed. So think about this. So if you have civil records, we set retentions for civil records by the date of the initiation of the civil case. So somebody files suit, that is the date that you use. With criminal records, it's essentially the opposite. It's the date of disposition of the case. So when the case is finally disposed, you start counting. All the years that may have occurred before that don't matter. You start counting from that time. Luckily, for one set of records, administrative records, we just use the date of creation whenever it was created. And administrative records are, often destroyed at the beginning of the fiscal year. For fiscal records, however, you need to keep in mind that the fiscal year is what implies. So, of course, the fiscal year in New York State is April 1st, and we all know why it's April 1st. That's because for many, many years, we never had a budget on April 1st, so it was always an April 1st joke, just so you know. And then the final information that you need, just the basic information, is the location. So, and there could be levels of location. So it could be a building, if you have multiple buildings. It could be a room within that building. It could be a shelf or a cabinet in that building, or it could be a box on a shelf. And so whatever level of detail you need, put it in. Inventories can be hard, they can be time-consuming, they can be frustrating. So as much as you can streamline it, the better it will be for you. And if you don't need to do it, literally don't do it. So this is the fun part, ladies and gentlemen. This is where you need to match the series that you've identified with the schedule item in the retention schedule. And what you're seeing here is the web page for our unit. And it's showing you how to get to the exact records if you're looking for court records. But keep this in mind. Even though you are coming from courts, not all of your records are court records. There are some administrative records that you're going to have. So you're going to have to use an administrative schedules as well. And you're going to have to use at least 2 court schedules, one for civil records and one for criminal records. So keep in mind, this is another difference between us and the state archives. State archives has one schedule for everybody, every local government for anything, and we have multiple ones even for individual courts, or individual courts have to use multiple ones. At the end of the show, there's a little link, and you can just click on that, and it will take you to this page, and then you can find everything. But if you lose that and you get lost and you're trying to find us, there is a simple way to do it. Our URL is fairly easy. It's nycourts.gov, so newyorkcourts.gov. The gov shows us that we're a government entity, and all you need to do is go to that. We have a little thing that says Topics A to Z. Click on that, and then find records management in that alphabetical list, and that'll get to you really quickly. So you can find it even if you don't have the direct URL. I certainly wish it were a little easier, but this will work for you. So let's talk about what a retention schedule is, though I'm sure most of you know. But anyhow, it is a list of records that an administrative unit creates, and that unit may be huge or it may be small. It may actually include multiple entities or just one. It depends. But what these do is they identify how long you need to maintain the records. It doesn't mean that you need to throw the records away as soon as they reach that retention. All it means is this is the earliest time you can throw them away. It's generally good practice to throw them away on schedule, but there is no legal requirement for you to do so. So don't feel that you need to. And then a schedule isn't just one thing. It's actually a bunch of little things. So for every let's just say record series, you will have a record series title, and then it will describe those records, tell you what's in them, and tell you what the retention period is. And usually what happens is that a schedule item describes one type of records, but occasionally, and in our case, quite frequently, it actually has multiple subtypes, and the subtypes can have different retention periods. And so this is a very important issue to pay attention to, because you might be looking at one schedule item, but there are sub-items beneath it, and you need to get to the correct sub-item. Lucky for you, we're going to look at some examples of these, but we're going to start easy, and then we're going to get harder. So we're going to start in kindergarten, and then we're going to get into, it'll be some kind of calculus I can't do. So here's the first example, and note this other change from the New York State Archives. We are color-coded. We are color-coded. If you see green on retentions, as you do with the series number and the record series title and the retention here, that green tells you something automatically. It tells you that you will be able to dispose of this record sometime. That's all that it tells you, that these records will be available for destruction at some point in time. And so that means, you don't have to worry as much when you're looking at these. And so let's take a look at it. Right now we have the series number. The series number is important because it's unique, and then it tells you what record it is. With just that one number, we know what record series you're talking about. However, we also provide a record series title so you know what it's talking about. And in this case, transferred case files. As you can tell, record series titles aren't exciting. And then it has a description, so that provides you a little bit more information so that you can better understand what we're trying to tell you the records are. And these are exact copies of files transferred to another court for jurisdiction. So specific kind of record. And here's the retention. Retain for 1 year, then destroy. All you have to do is wait for 1 year, and then you can destroy it. Remember, green means you can eventually destroy. So let's go here. Look at the diversity of colors in this exciting screen. Does the New York State Archives give you all these colors? No, only we do. And it's to make your life very interesting. So first, we start off with this orange here. I never know whether to call it orange or, it's kind of orange yellow to me, but orange is what we go with. And orange tells me this. If you talk to Jane Shin, it doesn't tell her this, but it tells me this. Orange tells me it's like the yellow light. It means, you know, maybe you can make it through the light, or maybe you can't make it through the light. So think about it a little bit before you do something. You know, there may be a risk here, is what it tells me. And so let's look at this again. We have, once again, a record series number, and we have a record series title, Wiretap Orders and Recordings. At least this sounds more interesting than the last one. And it gives us the specific description of the records and all the things, all the parts that it includes. And then if we go over to the, what do we call it? The right-hand side, notice that we have an A item and a B item. So the A item is green. And so what we know now is no matter what, we're going to be able to destroy these at some time. And so when we destroy these, and in this case, it's 10 years. The next thing is we have red, and that's retain all other materials permanently for research purposes. What this tells us is, since it's red, that we cannot throw it away. If something is red, we can never throw it away. So, Rich, are people having trouble hearing me? I'm getting a note about that. Wow. I don't think I'm here at all. So, okay, I'm told by somebody else that it's okay, so I will move on. Okay, here is the one that I really will not be able to do unless I look at my screen, my page, because it's so small. So, here's another example of a schedule item. And this will show you how our schedule items also distinguish between record copies and non-record copies. Just for a little primer on this, record copies are the copy that you have to keep as the official record documenting that activity. All other copies are non-record copies, and all other copies will be kept for a shorter period of time than the record copy. So if you look here, you can see that for offices of record where you have people holding record copies, these include county clerks outside of New York City and town and village courts. So it includes you folks. You have to retain these for 6 years and then you can destroy. However, it's not just that simple. There are other kinds of courts and other kinds of entities within the court system that also hold the record copies of these account receivables, because who doesn't have account receivables? So for other courts and for the New York City County Courts and for the Office of Court Administration Divisions, then you have to retain them for 3 years. And just as an aside, there's a different distinction between the county clerks outside of New York and inside of New York City, because the county clerks inside of New York City are employees, direct employees of the court system. County clerks outside of New York City are not at all employees of the court system. And then if you have other non-record copies, that has a different retention. So that explains why they're like that. And here's the other weird thing. The county clerks and the town and village courts are holding records for 6 years. Why? How does this make any sense? Because if the Office of State Controller makes a distinction between how long records need to be kept by entities that they think of as local governmental and those that they see as state governmental. And they see all the ones in A as being local governmental, and they see all the ones in B as state governmental. That's an interesting factoid. You can tell your family at dinner tonight. They will be so excited. So let's see, let's go into how to read a retention schedule. Retention schedules, remember, are actually designed to be read by humans, but they work in different ways than normal writing. It's not like reading enough. And so let's just go through some basic issues that you need to think about. Again, as I told you, I would repeat, our series title might be different from what you call a record, okay? If you call something T&Vs, we're never going to call them T&Vs. We're going to call them a much longer name that gives you the full description of the record, essentially, in the name. So look at that. As I noted before, we have lots of schedules. We have what you might call a plethora of schedules. So there will be schedules for different kinds of courts. And these are often in groups, but different kinds of courts, lower courts, higher courts, etc. There will be schedules for administrative records of the court. And there will be another kind of schedule that we have, which are non-court offices of the unified court system, such as mine. Lucky for you, you only need to think about the first two of those. Unlucky for you, you only need to think about the first two of those. Now, so keep in mind you're going to have for town and village, as I noted before, you're going to have a schedule for civil records, schedule for criminal records, and then some administrative records schedules. So make sure to look at all of them when you're trying to find something. Again, if you run into any problems, that's why we're there for. Drop us an email. We'll get back to you quickly. Our guy, Everton, usually answers questions, in a few minutes. But I can't guarantee it, and he might be off someday. So the other thing is, when you're trying to find it, keep a couple things in mind. The table of contents might help you find the records. They're generally organized in a logical sequence. If not that, we also have an index at the back that you can use. The other thing you can do is you can search the digital file for keywords that you think are going to show up for the records that you need. And once you do that, you will likely find the record that you need. But we are here day and night, well, except for night, anytime you need us. So now you have to figure out what to destroy. And this is an interesting method that we employ. One is working forwards and the other one is working backwards. And ladies and gentlemen, I never think this way, so if I will try not to confuse you during this. So working forwards is something when you're trying to identify records that you want to destroy in the future. So you're trying to assign a retention date to them. So you can write on the box, hey, 2023, for disposition, something like that. So it allows you to figure things out ahead of time so that when the time comes, you look at the schedule, you look at the boxes, or you look at a list that you have and you find out if you can throw them away. Working backwards is a problem, is an issue, a thing that we have to do all the time when we really haven't taken care of our records. And so working backwards was everything we did in the New York State Archives in the early 1990s. Everybody was trying to catch up. And so when you're working backwards, what you do is you find the records, you identify how many you can throw away, you put them to the side so you know where they are, and then you await your approval to destroy the records. So remember this thing, which I will tell you over and over again. Do not ever destroy your records without our written approval. It will be written approval. You will see it. You need to have that in hand before you destroy any records. And don't try to destroy any records before their retention period. I know this is basic. I know we all know that. But the problem is that we always forget something. So the most basic things I will just hammer over and over again so we remember. So let's go and look at some ways to look backwards working with civil cases. So here we have civil cases. And so note that we're in 2021 now. So we can't really throw anything away from 2021, so we're not counting 21. The only records we can count back from, we can only count back from 2020. So we're going to go with 2020 because that's the only full complete year. Pretty soon there will be a new full complete year for fiscal records, but right now we're dealing with civil cases. And so what this tells us is this. So we have the schedule, item numbers on the left-hand side. We have in the next column the series title, and then in the third title we have the third column we have our figuring, and that gives us the date to which we can throw away records. Okay, so it means we can throw away records from 2014 back. And so that's what we know. And so this is a good way to figure everything out. And then you can essentially set up a little guideline for you. Okay, here's the list of things that we can do. Let's look at the boxes. Let's identify all the ones that are from 2014 and earlier. Let's throw them away, and we can throw them and we can toss them. So all it is a figuring out the year that we have to count from, figuring out how many years we have to keep the record, and throwing everything before that away. Note one thing, another reminder, that for civil cases, and these are civil cases, everything is based on the date of the initiation of the case, not the disposition as it will be in what? Criminal records. Here they are. Criminal records, everything is the same. You have columns, you have them doing the same thing, but it's much more complicated in this one. Not because it's criminal records, but because we wanted to give you a complicated one as well. We're going to be doing the same figuring here, which is that you're going to figure out what the retention period is, and you're going to subtract that number of years. However, what happens in this case is that you have to remember you're always doing this by date of case disposition. An aside right now, think about it. If you're going to destroy records by case disposition, you should always box records up by case disposition so that everything that has a case disposition of the same year should be boxed in the same sequence of records, so you can easily throw them away and don't have to go through different boxes to find things. So here is, let's look at the really fun one that you have on here, which is criminal misdemeanors. And so criminal misdemeanors, you thought, geez, maybe since they're misdemeanors, they'd be pretty easy, but not really. So they're a little tricky here. So if you have disposed cases, you have some that are permanent. See, if they're before 1950, they're permanent because all court records before 1950 are permanent. We're saving them as historical records that will give us information about that period of time because there are so few records left from before 1950 in the court system. From 25 years on, what are we doing here? you're keeping all the records that end in 0. That's what 0 year means. I always get confused when I see this 0, especially because in this case it looks like it's a 0. And so what that means is that we are retaining a research sample. So we can't save all of these records. So we're saving essentially 10% of the records, anything ending in a 0 year. So it will give us a sense of the kinds of cases that came by that time. So if anybody wants to do some research on what kind of cases occurred, how criminal cases changed over time, they'll have every 10 years to look at to figure something out. That's really the goal for it. And then if we have, the final thing that we have is undisposed cases, and you'll see that in undisposed cases, we can dispose of them 1970 and back, but we hold on to them for 50 years. 50 years. And okay, I skipped over terminated in favor of the defendant. But here's what it tells you. In this one upper level right here, we have 5 retention periods for you. And so you really need to be careful when you think about that. And that's another one of the reasons why at our end, we look things over for you. We help make sure you're doing the right thing, and we tell you how to do it right. So don't get worried, because in the end, Jane Chin will save you. So here's the filling out of the RDR form, which, as a hint, ladies and gentlemen, and a reminder, is a records disposition request. And so, big rule, don't forget this one, you have to fill out a single form for every record series title, because there's no really way on the form for us to put in multiple series and multiple retention. And remember, when you use the record series title, that should be the title that you see in the retention schedule, just as the record series number will be the number that you see in the schedule. You have to use these correct numbers, and we will have to have you correct them if they aren't right. So those are the basic things that you need to do, and then you can either email or fax it. Ladies and gentlemen, every time I have to say the word fax, I cry, because I'm trying to get rid of the fax machine and this way of doing things, but it's been hard. So note that emails for retention schedule approval, retention disposition approvals should go to DispoRac. And that's right there on the form. That is a live link. You can click on it, when you're at the office and do things. So look, guess what? We're going to go through the form for you and show you how easy it is to fill out. And literally, this is the easy thing. It is not hard. So look at this. You need to include your 8-digit court code. So the court code, and there it is. It's broken out there. You just click it in like that. The court code is online on our web page, so you can get the court codes there, and you can put them into your form, and this will be easy. Nothing hard there. You can do that. You're all on your way, and the court code is going to tell you much of what you need to do later. There are a couple of other things you need to do. You need to fill things out. You need to fill out your court. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no Gotham Town Court, in case you were wondering. There may be a 123 Main Street, but I don't know about it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those of you like me who are from Schenectady know that that's the zip code for Schenectady GE. Wonder Woman, that's what we call all chief clerks or all people working in courts who are female. And so put in your name, put in your title, put in your telephone number, and then you can move forward. All of that's easy. You know the answers to these. Here's where it gets slightly complicated, but don't get worried. You're not going to get confused. First, you're going to put in the title as it is in the retention schedule. There it is. Okay. Notice that that's different than saying V and T's. It's very specific. It's telling you a lot of important things. Then you have to put in the record series number. Easy enough. You found it right there. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? This is one of those complicated ones. It's not just that number. It's that number plus A2. And if it's A2, that means there's at least an A and a B. And if it's a 2, that means there's at least a 1 and a 2. So you're trying to get the exact sub-series number. That's what you're going for. It's all clearly laid out in the form. It shouldn't be hard to do. The dates, you put the dates. In this case, it's just one set of years, which is possible. It could be a range of years. Either is fine. Whatever you have is fine. If this is the record copy, click that it is. Most of the time, it will be the record copy for you. So that's good. And also, most of the time, it will be in paper. You have to say what it's in. It's paper. Note some other complications. If it's not paper, you need to prove something to us. If it's in some sort of micrographic form, microfiche, microfilm, etc., you need to give us a microfilm quality testing report that shows that the film was processed properly. And then as long as we have that and everything else is done right, we will approve it. To store records electronically, you need to have this records management certification for electronic records form submitted, and note that it is very unlikely for a town and village court to have one of those in place. It's a very high bar to meet, and we don't have a lot of people who meet it yet, but you might have electronic copies of some things, and we'll just need to know in case they need to be kept longer. So ladies and gentlemen, what's the next thing? Wait a second. Okay. The next thing here is the final form. It looks like it's just come up again, so we don't need this. And we go to, oh, you know why I put this up? This shows you the whole form. This is really all the information you have to, this is almost all the information that you have to put in, you know, except for the paper thing. So it's pretty simple to do. It's not really a hard job. So now you're going to have to destroy records. But no, you're not, because I haven't told you that James Chin has signed off on it. Okay, so now James Chin has signed off on it. Now you can destroy the records. As you may guess, our preference is that you recycle the records because it's just the better thing to do for the environment and for landfills and all sorts of things. And however, some people have still used incineration, but incineration is getting less and less common. I covered the Adirondacks for many years, so I was used to people incinerating all the time, but it's getting less and less common. Most of the time, people are going to be shredding, and most of the time, that's going to be the form that recycling takes. So there are other ways that recycling can take. And so with shredding, note that the New York State Archives has a waste paper contract run out of their record center. And so there are ways that you can get in on that. So follow that URL and you can find a way to get your things disposed of without much help from you, effort from you. And keep in mind, all of these ways are perfectly fine for us. The big thing that we want you to do when you destroy records is destroy them completely, and absolutely, absolutely, absolutely do not ever allow a record that is confidential or sealed to be seen by anybody as it's being destroyed. Make sure that they cannot read those things. There is information about that on our website if you want to look at it in details. Ladies and gentlemen, we've made it to the exciting FAQs feature of our presentation, where I answer the questions Chloe came up with. Or to be fair, Chloe came up with the questions and the answers, and I will repeat them. So here's a complication. All of these are things that confuse people because they're based on paying attention to like little details. So here it is. What's the difference between retain permanently for research purposes and retain a research sample? So here's the crazy answer is this. Retain permanently means you keep everything. Everything is kept. So there are no records that you ever destroy. They're going to be permanent forever. A research sample gets to those instances, and there are a few of them, where we say keep all the records for any year ending in 0, but keep no other records. And the reasons we have the research sample is to just keep down on the volume of records that you need to receive. You need to maintain some historical records, but it would be impossible for the courts to retain all of the historical records or potentially historical records that they were holding on to. And keep in mind something else. When you're throwing things away, you think you're losing something, and you are. But there's always supposed to be a permanent record, what we call a record of court activity. Every court has to have that, which lists all the cases that came before them, how they were disposed. It has all the basic information. So there should always be, at the very least, that research material available. If you've thrown that away, don't tell me, because I don't want to cry. So this one is a question people have all the time too. If somebody's arrested for a misdemeanor but pleads down to a violation, what retention do I use? Well, you always use the final charge, because the final charge is what applies. Just because there was a previous charge is immaterial, because you have to go with the charge that it finally ended with. And so because of that, this would be a violation, and the records would be kept for 6 years. So this question can be asked in many different ways. What do I do with all the old copies of the New York Code hanging around my court? Another way I've been asked this question is, what do I do with the New York copies of the New York Register I have? Ladies and gentlemen, these are just books. These are just reference material. You can throw them away at any point whenever you decide you don't need them anymore. The disposition decision is totally based on you. I did have one court, and it was a higher court, that said, you're going to have to send me a note that said I can throw them away. I said, okay, but we don't govern the throwing away of books. So, do I really have to separate out all the driving while ability impaired cases from my V&Ts to keep them for 4 years? As Chloe says, no. Because what you can just do is keep all of them for 10 years. You can keep them, instead of separating everything out, just if it's better for you, just keep all of those records for the 10-year retention, because it's okay if you throw away records later. It's not okay if you throw away records before the retention, but it's okay anytime after the retention period has been met. And so that might be a good solution for those of you with that problem. Here's a question that we cannot really answer completely here, but it says here, my town clerk says the court records belong to the town. Is this true? Sorta, and sorta not. It's interesting, and let me just tell you the history of this. Keep in mind that there really wasn't a distinction between the courts in a village, the court in a village, and the village itself. The court in a town and the town itself, they were just different parts. The town court was just a different part of the town. But when the court system became unified, everything changed. And so in the unified court system, the courts are a separate entity, even though they reside essentially within the town or village. And so custody changes over time. And in general, the records of a current judge sitting at the bench belong to the courts. And in general, I mean, absolutely, they belong to the court. They don't belong to anybody else. But if that judge retires from the bench, dies while in office, however they leave, the thing then, all of the closed cases become the property of the town, but note that it says closed cases. So the cases that are finally closed, they become part of the responsibility of the town clerk, as stated in this law. But the open cases still have to stay in the court. The new judge will take those over and care for those records. However, the issue of custody of court records is very complicated. And so at the end of your packet, we have our little explanation of every single example we can have, each one of which will take you to a law or in one single case an OSC opinion that tells you what you have to do in that situation. Because it's different if you close a village court, if you close a town court, if you close down a village entirely, all sorts of different scenarios come into play. And we can talk about those more if anybody wants to. Jane and I have certainly thought about this a lot. Now, I see records on the schedule that I don't have at my court. Am I doing something wrong? Luckily, you're not. The great thing, we have some records that are on the schedules that have not been made for decades, but they still might exist in courts. And some of them are historical records. Records of that kind are not made anymore, but the records still need to be kept. So we need to have a retention schedule item in the schedule to tell them, hey, you need to hold on to this record. But if you don't have a record, don't start making it. This is a question that comes up all the time. Came up in my work in the New York State Archives all the time. I'm here like, hey, if nobody requires you to make the record, do not make the record. Just go on your daily business and everything will be okay. I found a bunch of old court records. What should I do with them? So notice that that no matter what, records before 1920 must be remained permanently. A little misspelling here. And other things you're going to have to, that may or may not be permanent. Guess what? Old records are the same as new records. You got to look at the retention schedule. You got to find out what they are, and you got to dispose of them based on what they are. So you might think this is a lot of work, but hey, it isn't a lot of work at all. It's a huge amount of work. Why is it a huge amount of work? Because you haven't done it yet. It's always a huge amount of work when you haven't done it work. It becomes easy once you do it all the time. If you do it every year, it will be possible. I am hoping that if there's any advantage out of the pandemic, it's the advantage of time, and that it gave people time to catch up on things. We have seen this with disposition of records. And so if that's the case, that's great. You might be in better shape now than you were last year at that time. But the only way to keep this from being a lot of work is to always do it assiduously every single year. You know, as soon as you're into the new year, put together your RDRs and send them out. This is when we receive the bulk of our retentions, our retention disposition requests and guest records disposition requests. And let me tell you, this year we had a huge number, many times more than we did in the first 2 months than we did normally. And that's good because it means you took advantage of this bad situation and made things better for you now and are making things better for you in the future. But just keep it up. So, ladies and gentlemen, we came at almost exactly the 11th hour to the other questions section of this talk. So I should probably open the chat and see if there are any questions in there.
If you want, Geof, I went ahead and took the liberty of gathering up the questions in the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
So now I've been in and out here just kind of doing different things, so I may have, maybe perhaps missed something, but I'll run the questions past you anyway. So the first one was from Jean. She asked, what is the last update date of the preservation guidelines that we should be using?
The preservation guidelines, last update date. Wow, that's something I haven't memorized. I think it's probably 2004. I had looked at recently, and that's what I'm guessing. But it will be whatever is on the website. So you can always check there.
And I'll make a note of this too, Geof, so that we can, as I email everyone who participated, the location of the recording, I can add some of these little, I'll put some of these links in there for people.
Okay.
So make a note here. Okay, Catherine asked, how is a town clerk supposed to know all of these things that a court clerk knows?
Here's the whole problem with the system. That is the problem with the system. The problem with the system is that you take a professional court clerk who really knows what they're doing, and then they give the records to a town clerk who really knows what they're doing with regard to town records and town functions, and then you're supposed to be an expert in two different fields. It is a huge, huge, horrible thing to be asked to do. And so it is always best to work closely together all the time. As a town clerk, I don't see how you'd be able to find the time to really know this unless you were a court clerk beforehand, which occasionally happens. And so the best thing is to work closely with the court clerks and get them to give you help. And you might just tell them, hey, you know, we give you help because we give you space, et cetera. We're storing your records for us. And so when you're helping us, you're really helping you. And so working together is really the best solution. You could try to learn everything, but I really think that's the best solution.
Okay, Kim asks, I received permission from Jane to destroy a record series. I now know that these records are also on microfilm. Do I need to reapply for permission to destroy the film if I previously had permission to destroy the paper?
Yes. So the thing is, everything needs to be requested. See, this is an example I did not think of. Everything needs to be requested. So if you have duplicate copies of things, so non-record copies, you have to ask for them. So this is just a different kind of duplicate copy. It's a duplicate copy in another form. So if it is another form, then you need to request disposition again. Again, I know this sounds crazy, but in the end, you are protected by this. This makes you safe because you can never make a mistake. Because any mistake that happens, it is always our responsibility. The New York State Archives, they can never make a mistake. So you will always be the one who will make the mistake. That isn't to say the New York State Archives is doing it wrong. It's just to say that this is the advantage of this system.
Okay, Virginia asks, she said she's a town clerk, and I just want to ensure that I do absolutely nothing with court records. She adds, they don't have to give me a copy. She asked the question, do they have to give me a copy of what's being destroyed? Don't I have to worry about scheduling for their shredding? I don't have to worry about their inventory, question mark. So she's just kind of looking for some clarification on these things.
Well, here's the thing. You are responsible to hold the inactive records of the court. So that is your responsibility. It is your legal responsibility to do that. As I said before, I would do this in cooperation with the court clerk in your town or village. I can't remember. However, you are responsible for everything then. So that means everything falls on you. That's why you want to get help from the court clerk. You have to store their records. You have to make sure they're protected in their storage. You need to set up for disposition of records. I would hope that the town clerk would, the court clerk would help you fill out records disposition request forms, because they'll be more familiar with them, but you do bear this responsibility. Then the best way is to share it and to make sure that the person who's really the expert can help you out, because they'll make it much easier for you, because this is second nature to them.
Okay, a few questions from Catherine. The first is, can you please explain undisposed access and adjudicated but not satisfied?
Undisposed access? Undisposed. Oh, the difference between those two things, is that what the question is?
Yes, yeah, undisposed access, and on the other side, adjudicated but not satisfied.
Okay, so undisposed means, there's no final disposition of the case. So the case never came to any conclusion. And the other one, which I'm forgetting, tell me again and I'll tell you what it means.
Adjudicated but not satisfied.
So that means is fine has been given, but it's not been paid. So, okay. so that means something gets satisfied in a legal sense once it's paid. So this is this happens. This is the same thing in a civil case. If you have a civil case and you haven't paid something, then it's not satisfied.
Okay, and also, if someone calls the town clerk for copies of old court records, who provides the copies to the person? Is it the town clerk or the court clerk? And how does a town clerk know if she or he can divulge or make copies of those records?
Once again, I would say work with the court clerk, but the town has taken the town clerk has responsibility for these at this point. And so most of the time you can make copies, but the question is, when can't you? And so you need to be careful with this. Court clerk will be more likely to know all the ins and outs about this. If you can't get assistance from the court clerk, or the court clerk doesn't know, you can always reach out to our office and we can help you figure out if you can provide the records or not. So it's not going to be as easy as dealing with records you deal with all the time, but there will be solutions.
Okay, Deb, I'll ask this question. This comes up from time to time, so I don't know if we can pinpoint it here, but she asks where the inventory form can be found on the New York State Archives website. And I do know that we make reference to the inventory form for electronic records, but I always seem to forget about the location of the inventory form for paper records.
Yeah.
So what I can do, and I would suggest, Geof, is I'll go ahead and get that information, and I will include that in the email going out to everyone about the recording, so everybody gets that.
Okay. Okay, and I'll just tell you, we do have a form on our website, so you could look for that form there. It's not like there are so many pages that you won't be able to find it easily. And the other thing that you should do if you're having some issues and you're trying to figure out records, if you're a town clerk, you could contact the Town and Village Resource Center. I don't have contact information for them here, but the town or village clerk should. They're a unit of the court system that helps town and village courts, and so they should be able to help you.
Okay. Amy asks, how do you properly recycle sealed cases?
Two steps. Okay, the first step is well, you don't need to do that step, I suppose. You don't need to get to a court order to destroy, so that's good. So we have instructions on how to do that in one of our forms, which I think one of our guidelines, which is from I think 2004. And it's very, very simple, but what we require is for you to stay with the records, watch the records get destroyed. Usually this happens through either in big shredding operations or in pulping operations. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that you actually visually see that it happens, to make sure nothing goes wrong, and you try to stay with the records. However, we do realize that sometimes is impossible, and in cases like that, you should at least get a document, I can't remember what we call that explains how and when and who is verifying that these were destroyed as required. The other thing that you could do is you might have a vendor who can do on-site shredding. Some people do that, and so that would make it easier for you to actually see the records being destroyed without, you know, getting on getting in a car and going someplace. A certificate of destruction was the form I was trying to think of that you can get.
Okay, Jeff. Karen asks, does the 0 year include every record?
Yes. Yeah, that's the important point, and I'm sorry if I did not make that clear. What the 0 year means is we're saving every single record from that year. Everything is saved. The great thing about this is it's easy to do. You just keep everything. The bad thing is, of course, it does have a lot of volume. And so just for those records, just for those years, you're holding on to them.
Okay, and I just want to point out too that a few of our colleagues anyway, and some other folks did mention that New York State Archives publication 76 has the records inventory form in it. So yeah, I will give you another question, and as you work on that, I will paste in the link to that for folks if they want to take it off of this webinar. And the next question is from Joanna. If old, such as pre-1920 court cases were found in our county, could they be retained for historical value if relevant?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can always retain something longer than the period. And if you think that they have historic value for your community, that makes sense to do.
Okay, we have a question from Jean. In your criminal records slide, it references records 1950 and older as permanent, and one of your last slides says 1920. Which year should we be using? That's a specific one for those specific records. What is the 1920 issue? That must be for one set. So let me look into that, and so I'll get back to you. It's criminal misdemeanor 1950, but what is the other one? So I gotta get to. I'm gonna see if it's 1920. I don't know. So anyhow, I'll figure it out. Okay, Jen. Are these records only to be handled by the court clerk? If there is only one clerk, can we use an intern to assist with this process? And does the request form come from the county clerk or the town clerk? Okay, so county by county, it must mean town or village clerk or the town clerk. You can have somebody help you do that. Sure, that's not a problem. And so what was the other part of the question? Oh, and once it's in the custody of the town clerk is really the one who's supposed to be making this request. Okay.
Is that clear?
Let's see. We'll see if we get a chat item here. I was just going to let everybody know Maria did paste in the link to the publication 76. Okay, we'll see if...
1 second, I got an answer to it. I got an answer. You know what the 1920 thing is? That's all records. We're holding on to all records before 1920. 1950, it's for that one record series, we're holding all the records. So that means any records that you have before 1920, you hold on to.
Okay, and William asks, in which year did the court system began sealing records, such as divorces?
I don't know when sealing began, but it's been a long-term process. I can't imagine. I'm trying to think of the earliest sealed records I've run across. It may have occurred in the 20th century, but I do not know at all that history.
Okay. Catherine asks, must the court turn over closed records of a previous justice to the town clerk, or can the court keep the records?
Court cannot keep the records. The law requires the court to give them to the town or village clerk in their town or village. And so that's a requirement. I know it would make more sense in a lot of ways for that to happen, but we're bound by the law. And the other thing is it's an issue of custody too. So if you looked at it as an issue of custody, you might be able to make arrangements that, you know, town clerk has custody, but the village clerk has the court clerk has easy access to the records and to the storage areas for those records.
And I just wanted to mention too that we're getting toward the end here, so we'll just have time for one more question. Before I ask Geof this question, I just did want to let folks know you can certainly email. The information is in Geof's presentation, or you can also email us here at the New York State Archives, which is arctrain@nised.gov, which is the same email everybody receive the instructions for this webinar on, and we can either get you an answer or point you to the right person. We can assist Geof in this too. So there's a question here from Maria. Our court started doing e-filing about a year ago for some of their cases, and we know that the New York courts has to do the proper destruction paperwork for their files. Some older case files are being scanned, and we are keeping the paper. If we are verifying them, should the courts be verifying them as well, since they are their civil cases?
So this person is coming from where? They're not the court?
This is here, yes. It looks like this sounds like it's coming from the clerk. She says our courts started doing e-filing. And that we know that the New York courts have to do the proper destruction paperwork, but the older case files are being scanned and we are keeping the paper. So if we are verifying them, should the courts be verifying them as well, since they are their civil case? They belong to them, their civil cases. Oh, and I think she's coming from a county clerk, by the way.
Okay, it sounded like that because of the e-filing note. It's an interesting question. Usually, I would expect that the courts would be doing some review, but you have a sort of shared responsibility in the county level that's pretty tight, and so they might make arrangements to not double their work. And however, if I were, you know, in that court, I would probably try to do some verification myself, because I would just feel better after doing that, because they're records of that court. So again, in the county level, you have the same sort of situation where they really hold the records for the court and have to provide a lot of the service for it. And
okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The one thing to keep in mind is you'll need an electronic record certification, of course, if you're going to destroy any of those records. But they said that they were going to hold on to them in paper form, so it needed it at that point. Go ahead.
There's a second part there too. She said old paper case files being switched over to e-filing. Can they be destroyed? And if so, how can we get this done?
They can be destroyed so far as you have an electronic, whatever we call that, electronic disposition form. So that will allow you to do it. That form has to be filled out. In order for that form to be approved at our end, you're going to have to be able to prove that you meet the guidelines of our policy number 9, which is available on the website. And so you can go and check and see if you meet those. We will have to have, you know, somebody certify that you meet those requirements. After you do that, we can sign off on it, and then you could destroy the paper copies of the records. So this would mean that you're storing the records in an electronic repository that meets our high-level guidelines. Just to give you a sense of these guidelines, for the records that we store ourselves, we store them in such a way that over the last 7 years, we have not lost a single bit of data. So we are trying to ensure the complete preservation of everything. And so they're pretty hefty guidelines, and some entities have not been able to manage to meet them.
Okay, and with that, our webinar comes to a conclusion.
I want to say one thing though. Keep in mind, if you have questions, that weren't answered, just send them to records@nycourts.gov. You'll find it at the end of your packet, and then we can answer all of those questions. And we might be able to even look some things up and try to remember everything and get everything even better said.
There you go. Well, great. Thanks very much, Geof. And thank you, everyone, for participating in our webinar today.
Okay, take care, everyone.